Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Nikki Roy and I'm the support coordinator for Leukemia and Blood Cancer New Zealand here in the Central Region. I'm excited to introduce our guest speakers today, James and Kathleen Bond. But before I do that, I'd like to let you know we plan to have time for questions at the end of the session. So you're welcome to send those through to me at any time during the next hour by clicking on the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will also be recording the session for those who cannot join us, and it gives you a chance to listen again if you wish. I'd also like to draw to your attention that James and Kathleen are joining us from Ohio in the United States, so there may be some aspects of James's care that will differ to how treatment is in New Zealand. That being said, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of James's story today that will be inspiring and encouraging. To introduce you to James and Kathleen, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary last year. They live in Cleveland, Ohio, United States of America, and have 2 sons and 3 grandchildren. James is a retired Ernst & Young partner, and Kathleen is a retired American Cancer Society National Board member, an active volunteer leader and caretaker of Jim's multiple myeloma and leukemia cancers. They advocate for cancer patients and have shared their survival story with over half of the US states and in Washington, DC at the National Science Foundation. Groups in Spain, Japan, Canada, and now New Zealand have also invited them to share their story. James's 2021 book, The Man in the Arena, Surviving Multiple Myeloma Since 1992, shares their story. It's available on popular sites. I now invite James and Kathleen. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Nikki.
Take it away.
It's wonderful to be here, and we're very, very honored. And thanks to you and Sheldon and to Nicola, who found our story on the internet and reached out and really was the spark that made this whole thing happen. So hats off to you. And also your lymphoma and I'm sorry, your blood cancer and leukemia site for helping to sponsor this. I want to start out by saying that while you might laugh, I am the real James Bond. And I can really prove that with Kathleen, who's my beautiful Bond girl of over 29 years now.
Thank you. It works every time.
Like many of you, I was diagnosed with this awful disease that I had never heard of, multiple myeloma, and told by my reputable doctor I would live at most 3 years, and if I did nothing, I'd only live a couple of months because I was at the last stage of this disease. The x-ray showed I had a lot of lytic lesions on my bones. I, in fact, had some broken bones. And it was really a very depressing day for Kathleen and I to sit there. And being inquisitive, I asked a few questions at the time. Well, I should say that was 29 years ago. And we're very, very thankful for that. And as we sat there listening to this terrible diagnosis, I asked a couple of questions of the diagnosing doctor. The first one was, if you were in my shoes, doctor, what would you do? And he said, well, Jim, I'll tell you, you're a fairly young guy, you're in your early 40s. I might just give up and do my bucket list while I could. And we went home that weekend and I really thought about it. I thought if the guy's right, there's some things we wanted to do, like get down to New Zealand, Australia, and maybe now's the time to do them. And I asked a couple other questions. I said, if you were me, whom would you have treat your disease? Would it be you, or would it be another oncologist? And he gave that some real thought. And he said, Jim, there's an oncologist here in town at another hospital who sees more cases of myeloma than I do. And he said, if I were you, I would be treated by him. He gave me his name and he offered to help me get an appointment. Now that really impressed me, that the diagnosing doctor seemed more concerned about me and my health than he did his own practice. And that's what we ended up doing. But before that first appointment with my first oncologist, we did think about the bucket list. And here's why I concluded I was going to fight. I thought back to my life and I realized, hey, I had another major health setback. I had shattered a leg playing sports, and it ended any dreams I had of playing beyond the high school level. And at the time, I thought it was devastating, and I was really, really depressed about it. But as I look back, I realized, things worked out pretty well. There's some things that happened that would not have happened had I not had that setback. So I reasoned, and Kathleen agreed, why can't we treat myeloma the same way? Put it as a very difficult challenge, and let's give it our best shot. And that's exactly what we did. The next oncologist I worked with for over 10 years, and I had 3 stem cell bone marrow transplants in those 10 years. And it was not planned out that way. It's just that I got a nice response to the first one that lasted over 5 years. And I kept asking, well, can we do a second one when this one stops working? And the transplant doctor was hesitant to answer me, but he finally did when the cancer started coming back. And he was hesitant to do it because he had given me full body radiation as part of the first transplant. He was concerned that I couldn't harvest my own cells again. So I said, what do I have to do to convince you it's worth a try? And he said, all right, if you and your wife are willing to travel some 400 miles for a second opinion by one of the US leading myeloma hospitals and doctors, if they agree that you're a good risk, then we'll do it. So we did. And that doctor, and that was called the Mayo Clinic, still is. He said, he examined me, took the test. He said, yeah. He said, I think it's a reasonable risk. And he invited us to do the transplant there if we wanted to. But he said, your guys are very good and they're right by your home. So we did the second transplant back home with my doctor now comfortable with doing it. That one, again, worked with my own cells, but only lasted a couple of years. And during the end of those couple of years, the cancer was coming back as measured by the monoclonal protein. And my local team said, let's check your two living sisters and see if they match your bone marrow. And luckily, one of them did, and they harvested her stem cells. And they got me ready to go. And after a setback or two, they were ready to give me a second or third transplant, but the cancer level had flared up pretty high. And they said, Jim, this is a long shot that the transplant will be strong enough to fight your myeloma, but we've got nothing else left for you. So we're going to give it a shot if it's okay with you. I said, yeah, that's all I got. Go ahead. So they did. And it worked. And I received my sister's female bone marrow stem cells, and they grew female bone marrow. Kathleen likes to joke that I've been much more fun to shop with ever since I got Becky's cells. She's a funny girl. So I stayed home, did what they stayed quarantined like they told me for 100 days. But the thing is, the cancer started to rise rapidly again. So rapidly that my local doctors said, Jim, There's nothing more we can do for you. You're out of options. You have to go to a hospice and just manage your pain. And you know, you gave it a good shot. 10 years is a good run. And I said, but wait a minute. When we were out of town at the second opinion, we heard about a clinical trial that was showing really good results for really sick myeloma patients. I said, what about that? And my local doctor said, oh, I know all about that. He said, you'll never get in that trial anywhere in the country in time to do you any good. So you'd be wasting your time to even try, which I thought was odd because he just told me I was all through. I don't see how I could waste my time. So I said, well, I'm going to try. And he got a little frustrated with me and walked out of the office. And I went back to my office and made a phone call and got the name of a few doctors who might have an opening. And I got a call back one Friday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk praying for a call back. And it was a British sounding oncologist who said, Jim, I know your story, and I only have two questions for you. One, how soon can you get here? And his hospital is 600 miles from ours. I said, well, we can get there tomorrow. He said, well, tomorrow's Saturday, Monday would be fine. I said, okay, we'll be there Monday. And he said, second question, are you willing to relocate with your wife and live here for 9 months, the duration of the trial? And I could not say yes quickly enough because here's a guy talking about 9 months when I'd just been told I was done. So we got up there and I was sick. And after a few hiccups, I got into the clinical trial. And this is the most dramatic part of our story. Within 2 weeks, which would be 5 doses of this experimental drug, 99% of my monoclonal protein went away, went into remission. I was in disbelief. To me, it was like a miracle. And even the people at Dana-Farber were amazed because no one had had a reaction like that. That's the name of the center I went to, Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston. So it proved to be true. And within a month or two, I achieved complete remission and completed the entire 9-month clinical trial. So I became an immediate believer in the power of clinical trials and second opinions, which really got me there. And while we were living out of town, I was working out from a home office, able to do my accounting work. I talked to Kathleen about one of her passions, which is volunteering for the American Cancer Society. And I said, Kathleen, this is just so great that the American Cancer Society, their research actually laid the groundwork for the drug company to take it to the next step and develop the experimental drug. And it's so great the American Cancer Society has a 24-hour support number that can be accessed from anywhere in the world with cancer questions of any kind. I said, but why don't more people know about this? And she said, well, we don't advertise. And she said, let me give that some thought. So one night she came up with this idea while we're out of town. She said, Jim, I've got it. She said, why doesn't she start an event, a fundraising event, to raise people's awareness to the American Cancer Society research and care that they give? And I said, that's great. What's your idea? She said, well, it would be a bike ride. And she said, we'd get riders to ride their bicycles from our city, 328 miles south of us, to Cincinnati, Ohio, over 4 days or 328 miles. And I said, that's a great idea, but there's one thing. Neither one of us cycle, and neither one of us even own bicycles. And she said, not a problem. She'll work that out with her colleagues. So I watched her work passionately for 2 years to get this idea launched. And before the event started, I was starting to feel guilty that I wasn't doing more to support her. So I went out and bought a bike. And I asked some real cyclists what to do to train. And I followed their advice, and I was getting ready to go. And shortly before the bike event was kicked off, we were at a myeloma fundraising event, and a local TV reporter knew a little bit about our story and spotted our younger son and said, Bob, do you think your dad can really do this? He's got some side effects. He's taken whatever he's taken. He's got this uncurable multiple myeloma. Do you think he can really cycle his bike that far? Well, I got home that night. We turned on the TV to hear Bob's answer. And Bob said, well, he said, I don't know if my dad will make it all the way or not, but I'll say this about my dad. When dad says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. Well, I was hugely touched, and I still am. And that's Bob in the picture. I also felt a degree of pressure on me. Now I'm thinking, I need to do more than just put in an appearance. I need to give it really my best effort to finish. So I got my bike with other riders. Kathleen and her partner in this venture had wrangled, and we got started. Well, with the help of our older son, who really was a cyclist, and our daughter-in-law, who really watched out for me on the bike paths and the country roads in Ohio, I made it all the way, 328 miles, 4 days. And yeah, it's different in kilometers. My wife points out, but
528.
Kathleen says 528 kilometers. So thank you, honey. So anyhow, I did the same thing for the next 11 years. And I'm very proud of that. And it really not only raises money and awareness to the American Cancer Society, but it really is one of I think the pillars of why I'm still alive today. I believe in doing daily exercise every day. Now you may sit back and think, now this guy said he's had 3 transplants and he's talking about doing daily exercise. Well, here's what I mean. Some days, all I could do in the hospital in a transplant section was get myself out of bed and stand up. After I got myself to just sit up in bed, but I made myself do that. And then I pushed myself to grab that IV pole and walk around the floor section as much as I could until they got tired of bumping into me, and they brought up a treadmill that you saw in the picture. So by daily exercise, I mean, do something. In the phrase sit, stand, or walk is a good way that I think of it. Some days it's more, some days it's less, but I push myself. One person said, oh, what you mean is you want to be on your feet, not your seat. I said, yeah, that's what I want to do every day, to the extent I can. I think that's been a key reason I'm alive. So things were going along pretty good. After the clinical trial, I tried another clinical trial. Oh, by the way, that clinical trial resulted in the drug that you can get in Australia called Velcade. I was one of the patients whose excellent results helped the company get more funding to develop the drug. So when the cancer came back, it came back less severe. and I got in another clinical trial, and that resulted in another popular event, a popular drug. And I was again happy to do that, to not only help myself, but help others. So our story got around to the community here in the United States. We started getting invited to go out and share our story at support groups, which we did. And that was going fine. And my local nurse said to me, she said, Jim, before your next out of town trip, before you get in that airplane, stop by the hospital. I want to check your blood counts. Something doesn't seem right with you. So I did. And she came back and her face was giving away the answer. She said, Jim, your platelets have fallen through the floor. You can't go on your next trip. You need to get a bone marrow biopsy right now so we can see what's going on. So I said, Lee, look, I've had 30 bone marrow biopsies so far. Are you really sure I need another one? She said, Jim, we're very sure. So I did, got a call back from the doctor a couple of days later. And he said, Jim, I have very bad news for you. You have leukemia. And it's worse than that. It's what we call treatment-related leukemia. And what that means to you is the only way you can survive is for us to find a non-related donor who matches your bone marrow. And he said, this is going to be very difficult for you. You may not want to do it. So why don't you think it over and let me know? I said, no need to think it over. We'll be down in the morning to get started. That happened to be a wedding anniversary night. And we went out and tried to celebrate as best we could. So I did enter the hospital for what turned out to be a very difficult experience. I was in the hospital for 75 consecutive days, and it was rougher than the other 3 put together. But the good news is they found a match on the donor matching database that I know covers the United States and Europe. I think probably your part of the world can have access to it also, but I'm not positive. But your people could check that out if they're interested. Anyhow, this is an allogeneic transplant, which we did not start doing those for myeloma patients till about 15 years ago in our part of the country. So it took a while for them to get comfortable they wouldn't kill patients. So they found the match. I was elated, and I asked the transplant doctor, so when do we do it? When do we do the transplant? He said, not so fast, Jim. He said, our approval doctors are not sure you can live through another transplant. And I said, yeah, but you told me I couldn't live without one. He said, that's correct. I said, well, go ahead and try. He said, nope, we can't do that. He said, we can't be the ones to kill you. So I said, well, look, before you've made up your mind finally, go back and tell the dissenting doctors that I rode my bike 328 miles, 500 plus kilometers, 2 months ago in 4 days, and see if that changes their mind. He did that, and he came back, and he happily reported it did change their minds. They said they think this guy's a reasonable risk. So on Halloween, I got the other donors' stem cells, and by Christmas, 75 days from when I entered the hospital, I was proclaimed in remission from leukemia, and I stayed in remission from myeloma the whole time. So again, American Cancer Society saved my life, because their bike ride that Kathleen founded and led was really backed by the American Cancer Society and their staff. So I'm really grateful for that. So I later learned that my donor was from Germany, lives in Germany, a young woman, which kind of explained to me why I had this overwhelming urge to go to Oktoberfest ever since that transplant. Now, I haven't done it yet, but it's the truth. So was it all worth it? Yes, it was all worth it. Hell yes. Got to see our sons get married, see them have grandchildren. As Nikki said, we got to celebrate our 50th wedding anniversary, all the great things that happened in between. It was well worth it, but there were side effects. I am shorter by about 3 inches than I was when I started. I have metal holding at least one bone together. I have a shoulder that doesn't really function properly. It's got limited mobility because when my disease was active, it destroyed bones. That doesn't apply to all myeloma patients. In fact, each case we believe each case of myeloma is unique to the person. But I also have what we knew was a risk when I got the cells from the other donors that were not my own cells, and that is I have graft versus host disease, or GVHD. That makes my skin and mouth very dry, a little bit of GI uncomfortableness, and it really impacted my eyes. I had to stop driving my car until we were able to locate the right expert who fitted me for these special devices that I wear every morning, take them out every night, that return my sight to normal. So again, hooray for medical science. I've also had my thyroid blowout, which I take daily pills to handle that. And I've had shingles after the first 2 transplants. So yeah, there have been side effects. There's probably been a few I've left out, but those are the big ones. But again, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. So what's our secret? How did we manage 29 years when a lot of others don't? Well, you've heard about exercise, you've heard about clinical trials, you've heard about second opinions. I believe that partnering with our doctor and nurses is key to this whole thing. Now, by that, I don't mean we try to be bossy, because I don't think that's my best chance of survival. They've got their science to add, but none of them will ever know our story as well as we know it, because we lived it. So if we can partner together and come up with a decision that both of us can live with, even though sometimes it's not the other one's first choice, that's worked well for us. And sometimes it's challenging to do that, but we try our best. We believe in continuing to make plans regardless of what the cancer's doing. We can always cancel the plans, but we believe that's important to us. And I try to comply with the doctors and our agreed to next steps. We try to comply with those as best we can. But I am stubborn. Arriving at something we both agree with is sometimes a compromise. One of the side effects I left out is somewhere late in this 29 years, I developed a plasmacytoma on the back of my skull, which I never had before. And I was told, well, that can happen with myeloma. This insidious disease can do different things at different stages of your cancer. So they were able to radiate that, and I was able to drive on. So some people say to me, Jim, you're just lucky. And to them, I say, yes, I am very lucky in so many ways. And I acknowledge all of that. But I will also say this about luck. And I borrowed it from someone else. Say you're playing the game of golf and you're facing a very long putt across a very hilly green. You're trying to sink that putt in only one stroke. Well, of course, you're lucky if you knock it in one stroke, no matter who you are. But the key to that is hitting the ball hard enough to get the ball at least to the hole and thereby give luck a chance to happen. And I believe that's what we've done. We've done everything we could in our power to give luck a chance to happen. And it did. So with that, I'll turn it over to my beautiful caregiver wife, Kathleen, and tell you about her caregiving tips that she's learned in these 29 years. Honey?
Thank you, honey. Well, I'm sorry that we can't be there in person. New Zealand is one of the countries in the world I would definitely love to visit. So maybe one day, but we're definitely glad to be part of this tonight. And actually, it's tomorrow afternoon. You're Saturday afternoon, as I understand it. So for us, it's evening, but we are very glad to be with you. And as Jim said, this has been a long road. And certainly being the spouse and the caregiver has not been easy for me. And I know all of you that are in the same boat, you always hear, you've got to take care of yourself. And as trite as that is to say, it's absolutely true. So I think that's job number one, is to try to take care of yourself. And I think this past year, given this whole coronavirus thing, I think we've all learned how important it is to take care of ourselves as well as each other. As Jim said, he reached a real critical point when we had to leave town and travel 600 miles away. And I should have translated that into kilometers. But when we had to do that, it was really a daunting prospect. And we were lucky that we could just throw the keys to a neighbor and pack up and go. And as Jim said, he was in it for the 9-month trial. I didn't think he was going to make it through the weekend. He was so very sick. It was clear to me that his kidneys were starting to fail. He was running a temperature of 104, 105. His legs were swelling up. He was very weak. He wasn't eating. And I just didn't think we were going to make it to Boston. And we somehow made it to Boston. And I'll tell you, that was the longest trip of my life. And we checked into the hotel next to Dana-Farber. And Jim went over right to lay down on the bed. I helped him over there. And I immediately picked up the phone and called Dana-Farber. And they said, the doctor on call will call you right back. And about 5 minutes later, the doctor on call called me back, and he happened to be the doctor who's the head of the myeloma program there, Dr. Ken Anderson. And we had never met, but I'd certainly heard of him because he's quite famous here in the States. And he told me what to do to get Jim through the night. And if that didn't work, we were to go right to the emergency room. But he said, Mrs. Bond, did anybody tell you that your husband is the 7th patient admitted into our study? So his study number is 007. And I laughed, and Ken said, I do believe that is good karma. And truly it was, because here we are tonight talking with you almost 20 years later from that night. So it really was a very, very fortunate thing. And throughout this whole saga, when Jim was diagnosed, he was diagnosed with a disease that neither one of us had ever heard of. And I immediately went to the library and got all the information I could. And this is back before the internet. So the library was the only place to go, and there was precious little in there. So I ended up going to the medical school here in Cleveland and going to the medical school library to learn what I could about this dread disease. And I can tell you that everything I read was awful. It was not good. Nobody was living very long. It was just terrible, terrible news all along the way, every article I read. And I thought, as I read them, I thought, well, okay, that's this person, but that's not Jim. And I kept saying that to myself over and over again. And I didn't realize then how right I was. And over all these years, I look back on that, and I know from what we've learned along the way, every cancer is very individual, and the same cancer with the same markers, you know, seemingly the same. If it's in two different people, it's two different cancers. So I learned back then to just understand that everything I read didn't necessarily apply to Jim, and that really helped me. And it also helped me to learn more about the disease and learn all the medical terminology. I went out and got a medical dictionary so I could understand all these words, and it was like learning a second language. I sat there and took notes and learned all these terms, and it really helped me to understand what the medical folks were saying, and also helped me to ask better questions. And through this entire 29-year saga, we have both kept up to what's happening out there. And you know, I to this day, I follow all the leading developments, but I also focused on the things I could do, because it felt like there was so much I can't. And I couldn't do so many things to help Jim other than make sure he had a good diet, and I could keep track of medications, and I kept a calendar. And in that calendar, I would write down if I noticed any symptoms or, you know, anything about his general condition, I would make notes. And lo and behold, that helped on several occasions, because at one point, Jim had developed an infection, but it was being hidden by the fact that he was on a steroid. And every time he got off that steroid, he would spike a fever. And I started to notice a pattern, and I told the doctor that. And the doctor said, you know, you might be onto something. And he said, the next time that fever spikes, Jim, you have to get right in here, because we want to see what's going on. So lo and behold, we did. And it turned out he had an infection that was brewing. And the doctor said it's a good thing it was found, because that could have been curtains right there. And so they were able to take care of it quickly. But it was fortunate that I was keeping that calendar, because heaven knows how bad that could have gotten at that point. But I really felt that learning everything I could about the disease empowered me. And I think it empowered Jim to be a better patient too, because we could ask good questions and we could have good discussions with the doctor and not feel so helpless. And I can tell you, there were days where it was horrible. You know, there were days where I was feeling sad and feeling scared, and I would just think, you know what, okay, today's going to be a bad day, and I'm just going to wallow in it and have at it. And sometimes we would discuss, all right, are you going to have a bad day, or am I going to have a bad day? So we would try not to have a bad day on the same day. And that helped. And I think even to this day, we should still argue about that. Who gets to have the bad day? But fortunately, our days have been pretty good. But we developed a few strategies along the way, aside from not trying to have a bad day on the same day. And one of them was, as Jim mentioned earlier, we do get second opinions, and sometimes third. We will ask questions, we will find out who's an authority in one particular area, and we will try to get a hold of them. And amazingly, we have been able to, and it's not because we have any connections with anybody. In fact, back then, I know my Jim mentioned that I was involved with the American Cancer Society. Back in those days, I was involved simply going door to door, collecting a couple dollars here and there. So I was not in any kind of leadership position. So I didn't know anybody, and we had no connections. We were just two desperate people looking for help. And in the myeloma world, the doctors are pretty good about reaching back and helping people and connecting people. And of course, today with the internet and the organizations that are focused on myeloma and blood cancers, it's much, much easier than it was 29 years ago. So we would try to get this information, and then we would discuss what we were willing to do, what worked for us. And we would weigh our second and third opinions and kind of look down the road and ask a couple of good questions, like, if we do option A, will option B and C still be open? Because we always wanted to keep our options open. We didn't want to do something that would knock out an option down the road. So we would always ask that question. So we would discuss it at home and gather the facts, discuss it at home, and decide what felt right for us. We would make a decision and not look back. We decided there was no point in second guessing ourselves. And we hold to that to this day, that we will not second guess, because we feel we've done the work, we've done the research, we are doing what's comfortable for us, and we move forward. Another strategy that we developed was to try to stay in the middle emotionally. And that is something that's a lot easier to say than it is to do. And by that, I mean, when things were going badly and we would come out of a doctor's office with some pretty dire news and things were looking pretty scary, we would try to talk ourselves up to a middle position by saying, you know, all right, this isn't good. However, we know what's out there. We know who's doing what. We know who we can call. We know what we can ask. We'll try to figure out what our next move should be. And we would kind of bring ourselves up to where we were in a more comfortable middle position emotionally, because we had a game plan. And by the same token, when we came out of an appointment with great news, like, hey, Jim, you're in remission, we didn't come out of there high-fiving each other and all giddy with excitement. We came out of there and brought ourselves back down to a middle position, because we knew that myeloma had no cure yet. And we thought, okay, this is good, but you know, we're going to have to probably deal with something down the road. So we would talk ourselves back down into that middle position. And that's really because we learned over the years that it's just too hard to have your emotions going up and down and up and down, because we decided we were in this for the long haul. And we didn't realize how long that haul was going to be. But you know, here it is 29 years later. So we would make those decisions. We would keep ourselves in the middle and not look back. And one other rule that became very important for us, and we developed this very early on, and this strategy has helped us, and we do it even to this day, is we have what we call our 8 p.m. rule. And that is 8 o'clock at night, no matter what's happening, no matter what's going on. Jim could be in the hospital. He could be undergoing heaven knows what in the hospital. We are done with cancer. At 8 o'clock at night, we don't talk about it. It's over. All of our friends and family know, don't call us after 8 if you want to know what's going on in our cancer world. You'll have to wait till the next day. We put it to bed. We just are done with it. And it really helps us to have a normal evening. And this was true even when Jim was in the hospital, hooked to 5 IVs. He would say to me at 8 o'clock at night, are you going to stay here and hang out and watch a movie, or are you going to go home? And that really helped preserve our sanity through a lot of this. And we knew that 8 o'clock the next morning, we were going to hit it hard, but we were done at 8 o'clock that night. And I have to tell you, in all fairness, when we first started this 29 years ago, it was a 9 p.m. rule, but we're that much older. So it would make for a very short night. So we have backed it down to 8. And if we ever move it earlier than that, we're not telling anybody. We're just going to keep that to ourselves. But it has really worked for us. And I can tell you, through this whole thing, as hard as the first weekend when we were reeling from the diagnosis and trying to figure out what we were going to do, I think the hardest part for me was after Jim's very first transplant, which was in 1993. And that's back when they were still considered to be very experimental, and it was using his own stem cells. Jim sailed through that transplant. That's not to say it was easy, but he was out of the hospital in 2 weeks. A month later, he was back at work. He wasn't taking anything. He didn't have to go back to the hospital for stuff other than just the occasional blood check. Life was seemingly normal, except I was a mess. I hit the wall. I could not stand the fact that we weren't doing anything. I kept saying to his doctor, shouldn't he be taking something? Isn't there something we should be doing? Are we just going to wait for this to come back? Because I knew there was no cure yet. And I was a mess, a complete frantic mess, until one day Jim had gone off to work, And he was gone maybe an hour, hour and a half, and the phone rang. And it was Jim. And he says, honey, I'm okay, but your car isn't. And he proceeds to tell me that he was stopped at a red light. The light turned green. He started through the intersection, and from out of nowhere came a pink Buick that broadsided him on the driver's side, shoved him into the car next to him. And I said, what? How can you have an accident after all we've been through? And I start screaming at him about having this accident, which was not his fault. And I heard myself carrying on like a mad woman. And I thought, you know what, lady, you got to get your act together. Because, you know, you're worried about all this cancer stuff, and, you know, a car accident almost took your husband out. So it really helped me to get real and understand that, you know, we're doing all we can do today, and we've got to control what we control today, and tomorrow's going to take care of tomorrow. But it really helped me to get my head the right place so I could just calm down and try to enjoy the normalcy that we had at that point. But that's not to say that any of this is easy. And even now, you know, when we enjoy the normalcy that we have now, we kind of have to remind each other how fortunate we are. And it's one of the reasons we really appreciate sharing the story with all of you. But another gem that's helped me is I read some quote somewhere that goes something like this. And that is to look around at what's necessary to do and do it. Then look at what's possible to do and attempt to do that. And before you know it, you may look back and realize you've accomplished what had seemed so impossible. And certainly I feel that we have done that, because this seemed so impossible to us 29 years ago. And yet here we are today, afternoon for you, evening for us, speaking with you. And it's our pleasure to be here, and we wish all of you the very best and good health, and we'll hang around to take any questions that some people might have. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jim and Kathleen. That's been just so special to have your inspiring story and hear so many great strategies. We do have some questions, so I'll get straight to those if I may. One quick question, first of all, just to comment there, when you talked about the second allo transplant that you had, Jim, you talked about getting it from the German donor base. So just confirming that, yes, we do have access to that. Just nice for those listening to be aware of that. And we've got a question here, and I think you've sort of answered it as you were talking, but we'll just confirm, what was the name of the drug given at the Boston that resulted in your remission? And I believe it was Velcade.
Velcade, yep.
Also known as bortezomib, which is available in New Zealand.
Yes.
It is great.
Yes.
Another question here. Jim, your lesions, did they become smaller with treatment over the years, or did they remain the same? I'm about to get my first MRI since I was diagnosed a year ago, and I'm not sure what to expect. I had lesions in many places, and I'm hoping they have decreased in size.
Mine stayed the same.
They heal over. Yeah.
With the exception of the plasmacytoma in the back of my skull. Started out as a tiny lesion that I could feel. I could feel the indent.
The lump.
Yeah, like a dimple. And the thinking of the medical team was, they had seen a lot of myeloma lesions. They said, "Oh, that's not going to get big enough to do you harm." Well, they hadn't seen this yet, but it did. That one turned into a plasmacytoma, which even fooled the surgeon who tried to remove what he thought was a cyst. And he stopped and said, "No, this is not a cyst. You need to go back and see your oncologist." And that's when they figured out it was a plasmacytoma. But that was the exception. The other lesions on the top of my head and other bones have remained stable.
Yeah, they fill in and scar over.
And the reason I know that, well, they're supposed to, but mine have been largely stable. But the reason I know that is I get an annual X-ray of the whole skeleton. And the key reason for that is they compare it to the same hospital, same X-ray machine, and they say, have his bones deteriorated significantly since the last annual x-ray or not. And that's how I can say with confidence that they've remained stable. I've been very fortunate in that respect.
Nice, thank you. Here's a question from a patient here who's had transplant and a number of trials and drugs, and maybe coming towards the end of the drug that he's currently on, and there's possibly some in the future, but he's not sure if they're going to be available. And his question to you is, when do you stop, or do you keep going, and how do you do it?
Well, here's what I did. I mean, I was on a maintenance drug. The second or third trial I was in, that experimental drug got approved. And that's a widely used drug in a lot of the world right now. And it's being used also as maintenance at a lower dose than when your disease, my disease was active. And I stopped taking that maintenance when I developed leukemia while I was taking it. Now, I asked the question, why did I develop leukemia? And the answer is, well, it probably was the radiation that you got for transplant number one.
Yeah, Jim had 3 days of total body radiation to prepare for that transplant.
But I also learned that I had to have a hip replaced about 10, 12 years ago. And the reason for that was long-term use of steroids make my risk for getting osteonecrosis of the hip bone, the joint, ball and socket, make my risk higher. So when I heard that, I started challenging my medical team, who was adding a steroid to the maintenance drug. I said, let's try this without the steroid. And they said, well, it's not normal, but okay. And it worked fine. But the other thing I'd add to the patient who wonders about what else to do is, at a key point, one of my doctors said, Jim, we think when I got the plasmacytoma, he said, we think you ought to add a second drug to the one you're taking now. And I said, well, wait a minute. What if we just increase the dose of the one I'm taking now? And I said, rather hold on to that other drug until I'm really in trouble, that other drug being Velcade, which I view as being really effective for me. So he agreed to that, but not without some hesitation. And he actually said to me, Jim, this is not something I'm recommending, but I'm willing to go along with you under these conditions. And I met his conditions and it worked out. And I was afraid he'd be a little bit, how he'd react to that. But he's the kind of guy that said, Jim, great call, congratulations. So very blessed with the kind of doctors we've had working with us.
Thanks, Jim. I think it reflects on the comments you've made about partnership as well, doesn't it? Working with the doctors. We've got a question here. Have you suffered from, and do you have a strategy for dealing with survivor's guilt when others have passed away?
Oh, good question.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. It doesn't keep me up at night, but when I look at the list, which keeps growing, I do feel like, why me?
Is your ornery?
And I'll be honest with you. I think people like you inviting us to talk, share a story, I think that's part of it.
Thank you, Jim.
I think we're willing to do that, and I think that's motivational for me in overcoming any guilt that I might have.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. It's a big question and a hard one to answer. Another question here of, do you use a lot of mindfulness or meditation techniques?
I do not meditate, but I do have a routine that some may call meditation. Before I go to sleep each night, I have a routine of things I think about. Take a few minutes. It's about my family and about being grateful and it's not a big long thing, and there are a few deep breaths involved, but it's nothing I would think a serious meditation person would call meditation.
It's your own form of meditation.
Yeah.
It works for you. And
Yeah.
that's the thing. I think people have to do what works for them.
Yeah.
And this one's sort of a bit similar and tied into that. I love your 8 p.m. cutoff. Was that hard to do? Were you deliberate to find other things to talk about or do?
You know what? It wasn't hard to do, amazingly. We would remind each other if one of us slipped, hey, 8 p.m., don't go there. And, when you mentally decide that, you flip a switch. It's really strange. It worked way better than I ever could have imagined. And
old movies, we watch old movies.
Yeah, we just do what we need to do. So, I'll be sitting there folding laundry, which is not my favorite thing, but doing something when your world's been turned upside down with dealing with this cancer, doing something that's normal feels good. And to be sitting there having a normal night, if we're watching some old movie or folding laundry or, having some dessert treat we normally wouldn't have while we're watching the old movie, Jim needs the calories, who cares? Have your ice cream sundae. It helps. It really helps.
I would say it was harder for us in the beginning than as we
we had to really work at it, remind
ourselves. As we
ourselves.
went along, we got used to getting bad news and dealing with it.
And flipping the switch.
And so we wouldn't let it dominate. But this cutoff rule really, it now applies mostly between the two of us because we could drive each other till midnight if we kept pointing out something we read,
keep bringing things up,
or heard, or something.
Yeah, we've actually used this rule for other things that are going on that are hugely consuming and important. And we'll say, all right, we need an 8 p.m. rule on this, and it's helped, but it has helped with this whole cancer thing tremendously.
No, I think it's wonderful advice, and as you say, could be used across the board for any challenging situation. Speaking of 8 p.m. rules, we're getting very close to 8 p.m. time. So I'd just love to perhaps just do a few summaries of some of the things that you've said today, because you've given us so many wonderful strategies, and I've got a few comments of them. Stay in the middle emotionally, try to take care of yourself, give luck a chance to happen. 8 p.m. at night, we stop talking cancer. Cooperate with the doctors and be involved, but don't be afraid to get second opinions. Partnership with your healthcare team. Try to live in the moment and enjoy life. Pink Buicks do exist. Don't give up. Continue to make plans and have hope. Do what is necessary. Do what is possible and look back. You may have accomplished great things. Keep up to date with research, but also focus on what you can do. Don't have a bad day on the same day. Keep options open as much as possible and make decisions and don't look back. And that's just a snapshot of what we've talked about today, but it's been so encouraging. We so appreciate your wisdom, your courage, and I'm sure it's been really helpful for our patients who have been listening. We hope that you do make it to New Zealand one day. You've got some friends here.
We'd love it.
We'd love to see you, and we so thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. Don't forget the daily exercise. I think that's...
Yes. Oh, actually, that was my last one I was going to say. Jim, let's finish on that. When I was reading about you, you had a little phrase that you used. Would you like to share what that is? The wee mantra, I think it was, don't be on your seat.
Yeah, off your seat, on your feet.
Nice. I like that. It's a great one to finish on. So thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Be well, everyone.
Have a good day.
Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.